Hello, Internet. Gino, that Pinguino Grieco here again with another episode of Deep Listens. I am joined, as always, by Billy. Prepare to enjoy pure gaming bliss, Rothert.
All right, yeah, if we're talking about Valdis Story, you hit the nail on the head there, bucko.
And we are also, as always, joined by PhD in training, Peter. When people tell me to uninstall the game, I uninstall it. Busby.
I uninstalled that game as quickly as possible. I will never again play Dota, I can promise you that.
Way to go. I loved it. Early on, you were like intrigued. You're like, should I get into Dota?
Yeah. I was like, this could be interesting. And then I played one game and I was like, this wasn't a right choice at all.
Oh God. Yeah, so our last episode, playing Dota 2 like a girl and esports, got a lot of downloads, got a lot of interest. No responses though. So people, if you enjoyed that episode, and it seems like people did, feel free to shoot a email to thatpinguino@gmail.com or on Twitter @thatpinguino, or any of the other older episodes. I know you people are downloading. I can see it.
We have
Maybe
the
they're
numbers.
just perfectly content. Like maybe they're just so happy they need nothing else.
I'm sure that's it.
Our voices and our intellectual content.
God, these guys are perfect.
It's gotta
They know what they're doing. Exactly. And so this week we are discussing Valdis Story, Abyssal City, which is a game you probably haven't heard of because it was reviewed by like one or two sites that are big name. But Billy, why don't you tell everyone why you picked Valdis Story for us to play this week?
All right, cool. So I had no idea what this game was until I picked it up in a Humble Bundle, of all places. It's been in a couple Humble Bundles, I think. I think it's been at least
Humble
two.
Bundle.
One of them was for female protagonist Humble Bundle, and then the other one was for, I think, was called Eye Candy number 2 or 3 or something like that. They had a couple of Eye Candy Humble Bundles, and I picked it up in one of those two. I can't remember which one. It was just sitting in my Steam library for a while, and then I said, all right, I'll give this game a shot. I had no idea that I was going to just jump into this game that I now love and have replayed 6 times, and I'm S-ranking 100%ing everything, and I can't get enough. So what is this game? What is it all about? Valdis Story, from an architectural point of view, fits into a specific genre, and it's a genre that we don't see that much anymore, at least not lately. The term that I'm going to use is Metroidvania, and some listeners will know exactly what that means, but for those of you who don't, I'll go over that briefly once I talk a little bit more about what this game is about. Valdis Story was a Kickstarter-funded development project, and it was originally made to just be sort of a training program for learning how to use the gaming program. I think it was Game Maker or something. Is that one of the programs, Gino?
Yeah, Game Maker's a real thing.
Yeah, so it was like a training program to do that, and then people just kind of got interested. They released some kind of beta, and they're like, hey, this is good. So they made it into a game. Kickstarter happened, and here we are now. The development team is like 2 people, plus like 1 music person, maybe like 1 artist. And so there's like 2 to 4 people made this entire game. And for that level of development, for it being a Kickstarter game, for it being, coming from the roots that it came from, only from that perspective, this game accomplished a shit ton.
Yeah, it's kind of incredible how much depth is there and how fine-tuned it is for how few people they must have had balancing.
Yeah, because if nothing, I'll say this game is very polished. There are some overarching things that maybe Gino and I disagree on, what's good or what's bad or what we might want to tweak, but if nothing else, it is a polished, what looks like a finished product with very little to go on as far as its development and roots are concerned.
Yeah, and it manages... Most of the things that are annoying are not annoying because they are oversights necessarily. A lot of it is intentional design decisions that fall in with Metroidvania games, but maybe I wish they had expanded a little bit more. So if you haven't heard of a Metroidvania game, the name comes from the game Metroid and the game Castlevania. They are 2D kind of...
adventure platformers is like what they kind of call...
I guess adventure... So you're running left to right, up and down, but the world is kind of a gigantic grid with different rooms that are connected, And one of the central conceits of this style of game is that you are constantly unlocking new abilities and new weapons and new items that
New
allow
doors.
you to that allow
Yeah,
you to
basically
open
get through new
doors.
doors. Yeah.
Sometimes it's because you got the ice beam, or sometimes it's because you can turn into a cloud of mist. In Valdis Story, it's usually because you get an extra spell or you get a key that opens doors.
Yeah, it's either going to be a key or some ability that lets you interact with the world, like breaking down a wall or getting a second jump
Or
or
building
getting a
ice pillars.
or getting a blink ability or something like that. You're going to get some kind of ability that lets you reach a new point in the game.
Yeah, and so
So
I
as yeah, as far as Metroidvania games are concerned, we don't see them that much these days. There is one kind of notable game that came out recently. It was Axiom Verge, which was released recently, and that game also sort of followed the Metroidvania model, and it leaned more towards the Metroid side of things. I think Valdis Story kind of 50-50 splits the Castlevania kind of, like the Castlevania side of the genre, but mixing in weird like Devil May Cry, Marvel vs. Capcom fight system aspects, which I loved, but it does take it a half step away from the genre, but it still would qualify as a Metroidvania game.
all the traversal is similar to a game like Castlevania, definitely. All of your characters are mostly the two that you can pick from at the beginning are melee fighters, so they don't have the range stuff that Samus has. You have to go up and get enemies, so it feels a lot more like Castlevania Symphony of the Night, except you have a combo system. So all the time you're getting ranked on how many hits you're doing and how stylish your combo is, as though it was Devil May Cry or something. Well,
here is a main difference. It's only in the boss fights. So if you get turned off by Devil May Cry grading your entire level, that actually kind of turned me off. I didn't want to have like the inability to explore and take my time, but I like that Valdis Story says we're going to grade you on your boss fights only. So once you enter the boss room,
you do still
then you're being graded.
You do still have the combo counter with the experience bump. So,
true,
I mean,
that's true. Yeah,
it's less lucrative, let's say, than Devil May Cry, but there is sort of a small presence outside of the boss fight.
You're right. You're right.
Yeah, and it's kind of weird because which characters? Billy, you've played with all the characters, and you've played this game for like 100 hours. Pete, who did you pick to start this game?
I started with Reyna.
Okay. I played with Reyna until... So how far did you get? Did you beat...
I'm still Reyna.
Well, how many boss... You finished the game with the same character, but...
Yeah.
What was like the last boss you fought?
I tried to fight the Raven, I guess.
Raven was pretty far in.
Yeah, he kept kicking my ass, though. So, before beating Raven.
Okay. I got up to the final boss with Wyatt, and I started with Reyna, and I was fighting Magus, which is an optional boss, for like 20 or 30 minutes, and then I lost after fighting continuously for 20 or 30 minutes, and then I quit playing as Reyna and decided to play as Wyatt. And so one of the big questions I have for this is, so Pete, how did you spec Reyna?
I've just been dumping everything into attack with maybe a little bit on defense, completely just ignoring magic.
Okay. I went almost completely into magic, almost completely ignoring attack. I feel like this game, it doesn't necessarily teach you that much about what some of the status effects and some of the spells and some of the vocabulary means, like Armor Ruin. Reyna has a spell
Reckoning.
called Reckoning.
Well, it's not a spell. That's the status effect.
It's a status effect, but I don't know what it does.
Right.
It just says on the menu you'll get Reckoning effect, and I don't know what that means.
Reckoning.
Now, hang on a second. We had a conversation about this earlier, but now that I don't know what made me think of this, but I think when you originally could buy this game, not on Steam, but like before it was on Steam, you bought it from their website. I think it came with a manual.
That would be very helpful.
That would have been very helpful. But in the game, it's not there. So
yeah, it's not really... in any it's not in the game anywhere. Yeah.
I basically spec'd myself into a corner. Magic I didn't find to do very that much damage, and also you're limited by MP when you're using magic. And it seems like Reyna's really a combo character, and magic doesn't combo. So
Reyna is definitely a focus mode character because a lot of her abilities and skills scale as her focus mode gets better. And as she gets more and more skill cancels, the fact that spells don't combo doesn't matter because everything combos with skill cancels. But you're right, like, who's going to teach you that, like, in the beginning of the game if it's your first playthrough?
Yeah, and so I found it, like, having the two characters who you can play from the very start, Wyatt and Reyna. Wyatt, all of his abilities are a lot more straightforward. You don't have to worry about status effects for the most part. Like, one of his first abilities is if you have a combo longer than 4, you just get like a flat 15% damage increase, which is absurd. Like, I was
That
killing
scales
things
really well.
I was killing things in one hit that with Reyna took 4.
Yeah.
And it just the difference between playing as Reyna going an intelligence build and Wyatt just basically leaning into strength, it was just it was a night and day different experience with the game.
Small aside, I just found the manual and it quite literally gives every detail you ever asked me about.
Well, that's good. I wish it was in the game.
I wish it was in the game too. That
What
is
is
a good point of criticism. What
is
is
it a
what?
PDF?
Oh no, yeah, it's just a PDF. You just like Google Valdis Story like game manual, and I think it came as like in the download of the game from the like developer's website, but I don't know if it's in the Steam purchase or whatever. I don't know if you
Steam
get
distribution.
it in Steam. Yeah, I'm not sure if it got in Steam somehow. I think it's probably on the community page, so there's probably a link to it.
Yeah, that's a real shame because I feel like maybe if I understood what, like, I've tended to not use Reckoning or any, like, I tried to avoid status effects because in most video games status effects do not apply to bosses, at least most games I've played, and it seems like in Valdis Story they do.
They do.
And so
Like in Final Fantasy games, if you try to use something like, reduce a bunch of armor resistance or reduce a bunch of magic resistance, like that stuff gets maybe it applies to a boss, but they shake it off next turn or something like that, or it just doesn't affect them at all.
Yeah, things like poison and things like silence just don't work on bosses in most games.
Yeah, but
and
they work in Valdis Story on bosses, which is interesting.
Yeah, and that made, with Wyatt, that was pretty easy because he has a bleed effect, a passive bleed effect that he can do every once in a while, and it's just damage over time, and it heals him, and it increases his damage output. Like,
it's basically everything you ever wanted in a straight up all out assault character.
Yeah, he gets combos and then he gets bonuses for comboing, and then
when I played Wyatt, I skilled him basically entirely to get crit chance. And so I had something like an 80% crit rate, and then I got some of the items and spells and abilities that proc certain effects on crit. Like, I had him in the paladin armor, so he would have like an extra light attack every 4th attack, and then I used the dark ability that made like dark blades appear on every critical attack, and then he had the blade shred on every critical attack, and then critical damage was really high, and I just like dumped everything into his crit ability, and I was basically like a walking death ball of just critting everything.
Yeah, I used the paladin armor too, and that's another thing. Reyna and Wyatt actually have very different armor sets. Like, you can find different armor from what I could tell.
No, it's actually the same armor for every character, but their starting armor is different.
You should, because I couldn't find the paladin armor with Reyna. Maybe I just
same
missed it.
spot. Yeah,
maybe I missed it because that thing is super duper good. So much better than the armor that I was wearing.
There's actually a place and a build for every armor set, but you're right. If you're going to be just straight up attacking, paladin armor is so good.
And you just don't get hit by like some of the status effects. Just you shake it off.
They don't even touch you.
Powerful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you wanted to mention some other stuff about this game.
I did want to mention some other stuff. So we talked about Metroidvania stuff. We talked about kind of what this genre is all about, being Metroidvania game. Next thing I wanted to get into was, well, let me just go ahead and get this off my chest. Like, I love this game, so I'm going to talk a lot of good stuff about it. In general, what I want to cover is aesthetics, game mechanics, and after your first playthrough, like the new game plus effect. So let me hit up aesthetics right now.
Hit it up. Hit them up style.
So the first thing that jumps out at me about aesthetics is the music. This is the easiest thing for me to identify with, and it's, I think, the easiest thing that relates to the genre. You talk about a Metroid game, tons of what makes a Metroid game is the music that corresponds to the level. It's a new layer of depth for each level you enter. Kind of leaving the classic Metroid, going into a game like Metroid Prime for sure. Areas like Phendrana Drifts and Magmore Caverns and Brio in Metroid Prime 2. Like these are excellent musical levels that the sounds that are created by the environment or in the environment add an entire new depth to your gameplay experience. You do see stuff like this in Metroid Fusion, Super Metroid, other games of the classical Metroid series. And I think this game emulates that style very well.
Classical Metroid is my favorite Metroid.
So some of the levels in particular from Valdis Story that come to mind are the Abandoned Gardens, which I think had a great soundtrack. A level called The Pit, which I don't know if you guys found or not.
I found it, I just didn't go in there.
Yeah, it's a scary place.
It's just too
The
frightening.
Pit had great music, and actually, sorry, let me take this back. I actually did not like. I wouldn't listen to The Pit's music, like, just for fun. Abandoned Gardens had just had a cool soundtrack.
Would you say that it's The Pits?
No, I would say that
Would
compared
you say
to all the other.
Abandoned
All right,
Gardens
let me
is
just.
the Abandoned Gardens.
Yes. Let me break this down to its finest details.
Okay.
Abandoned Gardens is one of the earlier levels you go through in the game. It's got a cool aesthetic. Everything's kind of poisony, flowery in nature, and it's got a cool soundtrack to the level.
Yes.
The Pit is an optional level. You don't have to go there to beat the game. It contains one of the most difficult major optional bosses, and the level itself is really tiny. There's only a couple rooms in the pit before it circles back to a back door of another part of the game. And the music is so different that it jolts you into this different kind of mindset. You're not in the rest of the game because this music sounds so different. You're in a weird place where, like something weird's going to happen, something different's going to happen. Turns out you are going to fight one of the major optional god bosses in the game. And I liked that. I like the fact that when you went to one of these sort of hidden areas, one of these secret areas, not secret, but off the beaten path, they let you know that this is a weird place. I thought that was really cool.
I agree with you, Billy, that the music's it's strong. It's definitely a strength of the game. Just in terms of sort of like a larger question, though, I found myself, as good as the music is, it still seems like there's definitely a lag between sort of what films or television media can do with both music and sound effects to sort of, like you're saying, signal change, create emotion, build a response between, let's say, reader or viewer in this case.
Right.
And what video games can do, right? And I wonder if that's just an inherent limitation of the medium because you can't necessarily distribute in the same regular way,
Do you mean so can do or what Valdis Story does?
I guess there's sort of two questions, right?
Yeah.
I'm sort of abstracting from Valdis Story's slightly, right? Because Valdis Story's music's strong, but you don't necessarily create the same emotional atmosphere. It's like a setting as opposed to an emotional response.
Yeah, I would say so. Valdis Story, it sounds to me, I don't know if either of you have played BlazBlue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I played BlazBlue. Yeah.
It sounds like BlazBlue. It sounds like kind of an anime.
It's made to be like a soundtrack, not a score.
Mm-hmm.
Difference between soundtrack and a score.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that Valdis Story, because it sounds like ripping guitar, and for the most part, you're just running through and
killing.
Exactly. Squiddly diddly doo.
Except it was like cool piano and
there's
like
cool
strings
piano in spots.
too.
But
Yeah.
the game, for the most part, it's not trying to convey that many emotions. Like the story's almost it's there, but the story's really thin.
Yeah.
You are.
I'm gonna get to that later because you're right. It's thin, and then they solve that problem another way. So we'll get there. Don't you worry.
Okay,
Don't you worry your pretty little head.
I wasn't.
You are very pretty, Gino, and your head is very tiny.
Thank you. I try.
There you go.
Yeah, so I just think that there are some games that try to convey a wide range of emotions and try to create an atmosphere. Valdis Story is not that game.
No.
Valdis Story is mostly jumping and running from place to place and doing sick combos.
Do you think that's a genre choice or a technical limitation?
I think it's a choice by the developers. It's not even a genre choice because Metroid has certainly tried to do that.
Metroid has emotion evoking music.
Yeah, Metroid has a lot more. They will actually have story scenes that are more than just actually, they communicate their story largely through ambiance.
That's true.
Whereas Valdis Story, very
right.
explicit and not a lot there.
So in gaming in general, we do have the same stuff that film and TV series can do. We do have games that have soundtracks that create suspense and create, evoke certain emotions. I'm thinking about games where the music plays a really important role. Stuff like a Silent Hill game or Resident Evil game. That something's gonna jump out at you, or even if it's not an actual soundtrack, it could be. Sorry, even if it's not an actual song or score, it's a track of sounds. Even if it's not arranged to be musical.
It's not a soundtrack. It's a track.
It's a track of sounds. I mean, it could be something as simple as the sound of a river and debris floating through it, and static on your radio as you get closer to the corruption of Silent Hill or whatever. In that kind of game, it creates an emotional response.
Yeah, there's a lot of ambient sounds that some games employ. Like if I remember correctly, in Bastion, there's a point where the Bastion gets messed up and the music cuts out when you're in the destroyed version, whereas there was a great soundtrack happening before. So there's just kind of like a smoldering fire sound, and that created a big change in atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Valdis Story, I think you could levy this exact same criticism at Arrow or one of those shows that is not. It is mostly sizzle. It is not substance.
Now, did any of you guys have your towns die?
No.
I forget if my first playthrough. I can't remember it that well now, but I think one of my towns died in the first playthrough, and they might turn off the music if the town dies.
That would be pretty cool. So, can all three of the towns die? Or
Ruck can't die. Ruck can't die. Tagram Village can be eliminated. Ish can be eliminated, and the prison can be eliminated.
The prison.
The prison is one of the last cities you can visit. It's not really a city.
I never found it.
But there's, the prison is.
Is that where you would find the Yeti if you didn't kill it the first time?
Yeah.
You saw it? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That Yeti. Actually, I think that was what made me quit playing as Reyna. I fought the Yeti. So if you don't kill the Yeti immediately. So at the beginning of the game, you
have to kill the Yeti before you get to Ishk. If you visit Ishk and you haven't killed the Yeti, then the Yeti leaves and it goes and murders the whole.
Okay.
No, it leaves and it goes to the sunken prison, and then you have to go in there and kill it.
Yeah.
But
it also murders everybody in the sunken prison.
Oh, in the sunken prison.
In the sunken prison. Yeah.
Okay, then I never found that spot. All right, but
Ruck is the only town that can't die.
That's the second town?
Yeah, where you find Vladen, who's sick.
Yeah.
And that's another thing I kind of wanted to discuss with this game is how many the names, the proper nouns. We love proper nouns.
We do have a thing about proper nouns.
This game has got a lot of them.
I think, that's sort of, I wanted to bring up Kickstarter later on, but I think a lot of that's a function of sort of the Kickstarter funding they had to go through.
You're right. We are going to hit that a little bit.
So, Billy, you want to talk about some of that stuff?
Let me just finish up some of the aesthetics. I wanted to wrap up a few more points. The music was one of the biggest things for me. As far as art design, I wish that there could. Okay, I think the artwork was crisp and good, well done. Characters were unique and creative. I never thought there was a character that was boring or, brought down the flavor of the game because it wasn't doing its job right. All the characters seemed to work. They did have some repeat character models for the NPCs in the towns, but who cares? I mean, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt for that.
All right. Guards are guards. Whatever.
Yeah, guards are guards. There was a character. There's actually a character in every town that's repeated, and it's like an old man in a blue coat with a white mustache.
Yep.
In the sunken prison, his name is Scrappy McPappy, and he's
that's a good proper noun.
He's one of the shopkeepers in Tagram. He's like standing next to the save spot and ish. He's around.
I saw
But
a
it's the same
fisherman.
character model.
I
Yeah,
saw a fisherman with the same.
the fisherman. That's where you fight one of the other optional bosses.
Apparently, there's a lot of optional bosses in this game. Oh my god.
Yeah. So anyway, wrapping up the aesthetics, I was saying like spells and abilities look good. They look fun to do. There was actually very few times where the artwork or the animation of the spells affected gameplay. There's one of the dark spells that creates these like laser beams. It's Soul of the Void. One of its, I think it's aerial spell. When you're in the air, if you level it up to level 3, it creates like 3 laser beams.
Ooh.
It like creates these little balls in the air, and then they home onto a target and like laser beam them. But if you have like another spell activated and that one comes out, like it starts to get frame issues. That was a little bit rough.
That was something I actually wanted to bring up. This game, my computer's real nice, and this game chugged at times.
My computer's not nice at all, and it chugged at times.
I never had a problem with
really.
I never had a frame rate issue in this game ever. Actually.
It wasn't frame rate. The game just slowed down.
I never had that problem.
I did like get deep into combos. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I got deep into combos, it would slow down.
Maybe
Sometimes,
I changed a setting or something.
I mean, I'm able to play The Witcher 3 at highest settings, and I don't see anything like that. And this game is 2D. I couldn't understand it because at one point I tried to watch a video while I was still playing, and that slowed it all the way down. It was like it was a slideshow. And then I turned that off, and that was fine.
It's like playing PowerPoint.
Yeah, I was making a move. It was like playing against a computer in chess. It was thinking about its move, and then I would be making my move.
What's it going to be?
Ooh, 7-hit combo.
All right, so there were crisp physics if you didn't have these slow chugging moments of the game, but I thought the physics were nice.
I bet a lot of
that I
our
have with
listeners have brushed metal MacBooks, all right? Let's not discriminate against people with brushed metal MacBooks.
One criticism for the aesthetics, as far as the artwork goes, I wish that they had done any kind of character animation in like the dialogue screen, and instead of just like the same portrait over and over again. I would have wanted there to be some kind of emotion tool or like just like one more level of depth. Because if you think about all the other depth they added to this game, how hard would it have been to give us like a happy face or a frowny face Wyatt?
Wyatt doesn't feel happy. He just skulks.
All right. One emotion, sword.
Yeah, okay, but you know, Vladen or Gilda or Reyna, the other playable characters, they have
emotional range.
Yes, where Wyatt actually doesn't. Wyatt doesn't have that much emotional range, but the other characters really do.
Gilda doesn't seem to have much emotional range.
No, she does. You didn't play Gilda's game, but she actually
You don't know
does.
Gilda like Billy does.
I know Gilda. She's actually become one of my favorite characters. I think you would really like to play Gilda, Gino. She seems like your kind of character.
That would be nice. So
you wanted a dope-ass spellcaster? You got it.
Instead, I played as Reyna and then boxed myself into a corner and then had to quit.
Now, let me defend this game from you being an idiot. Yeah.
Wait, before we
Gino's mouth is wide.
Before we do that,
all right?
Is it home in on things or hone in on things?
Home.
Are we sure?
I'm pretty sure it's home. Like homing missile?
All right. Now make Gino look dumb, now that I've looked dumb.
No, all right, whatever. All right, so.
Tell me how I'm an idiot.
We're playing this game. I announced it last week. Gino hits me up like the first day he's playing it. And I get his knee-jerk reaction day one. I say, hey, you know, what character are you playing? Gino says, oh, I'm playing Reyna. To which I respond, hey, like, you don't have me. That's fine, but just realize you picked the harder character to play.
The game
Gino responds, wait, did I? Where did it say that? Oh, that's okay, Gino. You must have missed it. But in the character select screen, it says Reyna is the advanced play type, whereas Wyatt's the normal play type.
Yeah, but advanced versus normal. I've played a lot of video games.
Gino's very advanced.
Clearly not.
Okay. Pete got through because he didn't spec intelligence.
No.
Like, specking
Okay,
towards
you
spells.
not only
look-
picked the harder character, then you went the harder skill build.
Yeah, in
I
my
didn't
mind,
know
Went hard
that.
both ways.
spells are
didn't-
too hard. I can't cast them. It's too complicated. I'm just gonna hit
You just
stuff.
went the hard way. Gino, if you've played a lot of video games, think about all the other times you get to pick a class. All right, when do you ever go spellcaster first? Don't be naive here. You know what I'm talking about.
You
Don't
know
be
that. You
naive.
knew what you were doing.
You
when
know
you
what you're
picked
talking about.
Spellcaster.
You
Hey,
were
Gino, did you ever play Dark Souls?
Yeah, fuck that game.
How was Felipe YOLO for you? That was the name of your character, right?
Yes.
Didn't you go naked club run in that game?
Yes.
Yeah? Oh,
Yes.
were you a big spellcaster, or were you just a potion drinking like marauder with a stick?
I was that.
Yeah.
The difference is, in Dark Souls and in games like that, if you are not looking at a guide or something, you don't know where the hell spells are sometimes, or you don't even know how to get spells.
You're right.
In
This
Valdis
game is not
Story,
that.
This game is not that. I thought that I would have access to the spells. I thought that I would get these buffs. Like, a lot of Reyna's buffs seem useful, like getting increased magic regeneration. You can decrease the cost of her spells. My problem was just that once I had her upgraded in that way, the spells just didn't do as much damage as combos. And so against
They
bosses,
didn't do as much damage because they scale with intelligence, and there's certain like breaks of when they get stronger and stronger. Plus, when you get to your level 2 of each, you're gonna get mana starved.
where does it say that it scales with intelligence? Because there isn't a stat.
When you increase your int, it increases magic, and that's what
It
scales.
increases MP, but
No, it increases a stat called MAG magic too, and it's power
Okay.
of your magic stuff. And there are certain points, like if you get like if you go from 14 points of int to like 15, you'll get like a bigger jump.
well, that's a great intricacy that I didn't understand at all.
Tough shit.
You should have read a guide online.
I didn't. I just
You
played the
should've
game
Googled
and
it.
like noticed this stuff. It tells you how much it's going to go up, and if you just look at what it's going to do when you add a point, you can see the trend. Anyway, we're just, jabbering at this point. Where were we going before this?
You were talking about aesthetics.
Aesthetics.
I just want to say for the record, you have 85 hours on record in Valdis Story.
Yeah. This game is fucking good.
Yeah,
Let the
but
record show.
you put in the hours. Like,
did.
This was hard-won knowledge. I think it's
I'm
fair to
on
say.
my 6th playthrough.
Why don't you just know that when you get to get to 15 intelligence, it's a huge jump?
That's
You
second-
fool!
That's second playthrough kind of knowledge, Gino. You gotta
You
have.
boob. These boobs.
Bill
They
don't,
don't understand.
Billy don't want no scrubs.
Yeah, so I just found it because once I had a grasp of what I was doing, and once I played as Wyatt and just spec'd in one direction instead of trying to spread out my points and do what seemed to make sense, the game played so differently. I enjoyed it when I played it that way, and once I started looking up information, but coming into it cold, it was unpleasant.
I came into it cold my first playthrough, and I played as Wyatt, and my run was sloppy. I didn't get very good rankings on all the bosses. I really didn't care. It was my first playthrough. I was like, all right, let me just see what this game's all about. I made some mistakes in my build. I did reskill my first build, and luckily, and I wanted to get to this next, there is an option to reskill and restat your character without starting a new game. There's an NPC in the game. His name is Mesmer the Hypnotist. And if you go talk to him and trade him some very easy to find enemy drops, so this is relatively easy to do. You can just reset your skills, reset your stats, and reallocate them as you see fit. So
As long as you find Mesmer the Hypnotist.
he's right after Tagrum Village. Just up on a ledge.
Yep.
Anyway, that gets into the next general topic I wanted to discuss. We might want to take a break before I get into that. So let's hit maybe like one more point and then jump to a break. So like I was saying, there was a criticism I had to just finish the aesthetics talk. The criticism that I had was the artwork could have had one more layer of depth, which was I wish we could have had some kind of I mean, it could have been anything like thought bubbles that showed like happiness or sadness or whatever. It could have been anything.
Emojis.
It could have been emojis. Yeah, give me some little poo face for someone.
Why it's a scowly face.
Yeah. Why it's a scowly face. You know.
Forever.
Thanks, Pete, for giving us the
dancing monkey emoji.
being on emoji watch. I want to have a Sir Pancakes emoji right now.
Sir Pancakes was pretty
Sir
great.
Pancakes was pretty great. And he's got one of the best focus finishers. It's so cheap. Like, if you are a focus finish character, you pick Sir Pancakes focus finisher because it's the cheapest focus finisher.
Did you find Sir Pancakes, Pete?
I have not. I'm a little disappointed. I've assumed you made that up, but
No, Sir Pancakes,
Pancakes
is a flying corgi.
with a top hat.
flying corgi. I need to find Sir Pancakes.
Did you
He's
find...
mana crystal mines.
Yeah, you need to get him before the mana crystal mines collapse.
You can actually go back there.
You can?
You can get back in. You just can't get back in till later.
How late?
I liked that.
Like 12:30.
Okay.
There was a part of the game where the level collapses on you and you have to escape and get out, and it seems like you can't get back in. Don't worry. If you miss a treasure chest or you missed an assist character, you can actually go back into that part of the game just a little bit later. You have to unlock one more ability to get into a back door, and then you can get back through the level.
Did you find McSteamy or McSteely?
Ben McSteely?
Yeah.
Yeah, he had a pretty good focus finisher too. His was like the banana throw.
Did you find Lub Wub the panda or whatever his name is?
Chaplan Kin?
Yeah, Chaplan Kin, the
You weren't
panda.
even close.
Con Lapchin, I think. I can't remember his
Lub
Lub
Wub
Wub
the
the
panda.
panda. Bolveric, I think, is the best assist. He's like the guy with the ice axes. He
I
gives
didn't
you
use
just, like,
that guy.
He's one of the best because he just gives you a raw. I mean, even if he whiffs the actual assist, he gives just like a raw attack buff for like 8 seconds.
I used Aussie, the Australian guy with the boomerangs.
Oh yeah, he's actually good.
Yeah.
That's real good. Chance to stun, strong.
Combo extender.
Yes. So, I said my piece about the aesthetics. I'm all about the aesthetics. I think every level of the game was unique and interesting. And even though, all right, hold on. Let me
There's
just
an ice level. There's a fire
let
level.
me take a
there's
step back.
lightning
Yeah,
level,
not like unique and interesting in that way,
there's a
but
poison level.
because every Metroid game has the poison
that's
level, the
crazy.
ice level, the fire level, the whatever.
It's a video game.
It's a video game. They have levels, right?
There
But
were no mine carts though.
Which I thought was the biggest oversight. If
Yeah,
I have
mine
one
cards.
complaint.
every one of these levels had a pretty intricate backdrop. I don't know if you realize that, but they all had different, like, highly detailed backdrops behind
Yep.
the level. And that was a piece that I liked, because in a Metroid game or a Castlevania game, you have like a brick wall backdrop.
I like when games have backgrounds.
That's
Not just a black void.
yeah, that's good. Metroid was like
No
infamous
background.
for just having like a black background
I just
or
like
like
to
a
guess.
rock background because you're underneath the planet or something like that. Boring background, but this is cool backgrounds, cool aesthetics.
Yeah.
All right, I think I have two more major like areas that I want to talk about, which is game mechanics and new game plus stuff. So
Okay.
maybe we hit that after the break.
Maybe we should take a break.
Yeah, sounds like a good idea.
Okay, let's take a quick break. We will be back in a sec. Woo! And we're back talking about Valdis Story, Abyssal City, game made on Kickstarter and Dreams. Billy, you wanted to talk about game mechanics next.
Oh yes,
Oh,
game
yes.
mechanics.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so this game's got a couple of interesting game mechanics that I wanted to highlight. First, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. There was one NPC that I thought was a blessing, and not every game should have this, but it heavily benefited Valdis Story. This game is the kind of game where you build stats, you allocate stat points, you allocate skill points, you choose a build, essentially. If it doesn't work, then you might be screwed up a little bit. Are we okay? Are we on sound?
Yeah, we're okay on sound. I think we talked about Mesmer.
We did talk about Mesmer, but I wanted to
Wait,
sort
Mesmer
of
the hypnotist?
Mesmer the hypnotist.
Yeah, Mesmer the
Yes.
hypnotist.
Yes, Mesmer the hypnotist.
He's my favorite hypnotist in the game.
The reason why I wanted to talk about him was because I like that in this particular game, you have the freedom to experiment with a radically new build from what maybe you started the game with. Mesmer is a cheap option to reskill and restat almost on a whim. And so it promotes creativity, it promotes experimentation, and it promotes like testing play styles and finding out what the best fit is for you before you go to the end game.
However,
yes,
I would like to say I wish that Mesmer gave you at least 1 or 2 free respecs before he asks you to grind for payment on respecs, because I don't especially enjoy grinding, and the items that you need to give Mesmer, though they are more common, you do need a lot of them.
I will talk about that because that is actually kind of a beef that I have with this game. So
what? The Grindfather has a beef?
I do, because the way that most people grind, they actually don't benefit from this system. So I'll get to that. So I wanted to hit up Mesmer real quick to just get us started on the game mechanics. I like Mesmer being there because I like that you can reset without having to restart the game. So I wanted to talk about that. Let's talk about crafting, because you already mentioned it.
Okay.
There is a crafting system in this game where you create and upgrade your weapons and armor and specific items. Here's one thing that I think that they did very well. In almost every town, let me take one step back. Most of the items that you drop go through like level 1, level 2, level 3 of said item, right? For example, one of the items is called rough cloth. Level 2 is soft cloth. Level 3 is silken cloth, right?
Yo, girl.
Fancy.
If you are if you're going through the game in the early levels and maybe you get stuck on a level, you gotta just play it a bunch, or you get lost, or you're killing a bunch of enemies, you get a bunch of rough cloth. It's not that useful later in the game. That's okay. There's an NPC somewhere that will trade you 1 of the next level for 3 or 4 of the first level. So until you are getting really lost and getting super flooded with all these drop items and craftables, usually you're never sad about any drop you get, because you can almost always turn it into what you need.
So is craftables? There has to be a Kraft mac and cheese called craftables, right?
I assume there's something, at least some sort of Lunchables version.
Smuckers, Uncrustables, Kraft, Recraftables. It's going to be in every kid's lunchbox across the nation.
I'm going to trade 3 rough cloths and
for
2 shiny
your
pebbles.
Demon Ruby.
For your Demon Ruby and a craftable.
So
I hope it's the mini pizza kind.
Oh my goodness.
I
made my mom sick when I asked for that to take to lunch, like in middle school.
The Lunchables pizzas?
Yeah, she was like, I can make better food than this. But it's a mini pizza.
I will just cook authentic Italian food for you.
I'll cook better food. What are you doing to yourself? Advertising works.
There you go. Marketing.
So I don't think you guys experienced this part of the crafting system, but if you fight the hardest boss in the game, not the final boss, there's a boss named Laelodin who is hands down the hardest boss in the game. And I'm glad you never got to this boss, because you would have just shit. You would have hated this boss fight. But I
hated a lot of boss fights.
If you beat it,
hated Raven,
you get an NPC that can craft like the ultimate weapon for your character. But what you need to do to get it is not upgrade any items else in the game, because all those craftables, you need to spend them all on the ultimate weapon.
No.
So that sounds like a gigantic middle finger. Is what that sounds
that's some of that Final Fantasy shit where you can't open certain chests.
Yes. So I'm kind of torn, right? So there's some items in the game that you have an abundance of. These low-level items, you get as much of them as you want, depending on how many enemies you kill. But there are certain items in the game that you only get a certain amount of. They are things like Rogue's Cowl, Warrior Plate, and Mage's Robe, which are the items that upgrade your armor, depending on what kind of armor it is. If it's like an int-based or agility-based or a strength-based armor, It'll be one of those things. You only get like 4 per playthrough of each. So at most, you can max out 2 of those armors, or 2 of those robes for the for the intelligent classes. The other ones you can't upgrade, so you have to kind of choose. And if you just happen to upgrade the first one you get because you think, oh, I'm going to get more of these, you're kind of screwed, because you can't reset that. And that's something that I don't like.
It also sounds like getting to the hardest boss in the game, being a super enfranchised player. You have beaten the final boss, or the hardest boss, the hardest optional boss, and the game's like, hey, that ultimate weapon? Oh, I'm sorry. I see you upgraded something.
Did you build some rough cloth, smooth cloth, silken cloth? Oh,
what I actually did was
rough.
I missed...
Bro.
The first time I got there, I missed one of the optional feral bosses. And
You fool.
you need
How
to
could
get
you how could you have missed one of the feral bosses, really?
I know, like, it was my first playthrough. I should have known better.
Now who's the idiot?
Me, clearly.
Mm-mm.
So there's an item called, I'm not even going to say it. I'm probably going to say it right, maybe. We'll see. Tamahagane? I don't know.
What'd you call me?
Are you asking for confirmation from us? Like,
or whatever. It's like the equivalent of like Orichalcum in a Final Fantasy game. Fancy crafting metal. Fancy crafting metal. So this fancy crafting metal, you get 10 of them in the game. And if you spend 1, you can't get the ultimate weapon. Further, there are 3 bosses which drop an item called Arc Feral Spirit. And there's 3 of them. You need 3 to get your ultimate weapon. The other stuff you can just farm for. You can just grind for them. But without those 3 weapons, without those 3 drops, you can't build the weapon. So if you get there, you're screwed. I don't like that.
I don't like that. I didn't even try to do it, and that sounds like something I would really not enjoy.
But here's why I'm torn. It adds a challenge, and there's actually an achievement for this in the game. Beat the entire game using your starting gear, unupgraded. There's an achievement for that, and so I like them adding a depth of challenge, saying, "Hey, you played this game before, right? This is your second or third playthrough. Here's a real challenge.
yeah, but
Get this ultimate weapon, and to do it, you have to not upgrade any of your other stuff. So it's going to be harder for you."
I can't think of a more pointless and capricious way to try to enhance playthrough than the addition of achievements like that.
Yeah. That sounds like the kind of thing that would lead to you having like 85 hours played in this game.
Just because I S-ranked every boss with every character doesn't mean that I have a problem. Gino, by the way, I played Reyna using the same skill build you did.
Word?
I beat Magus second try, and then I got S rank on like my 5th try.
Weird.
Yeah.
You need someone who's played for like 85 hours.
I was
has more
also
of a
lower
chance?
level than you. Oh man. I mean, the thing is, you couldn't even beat it. I got S rank. So look, okay, back to real talk. Gino, you mentioned something.
Yes.
That some of these items were not easy to get. I actually looked up the drop charts.
All right, look, no.
For these
no. What do you want to talk about? I'm not listening.
Hold on. This is just a small
I don't want to hear about your drop charts.
Small point.
Charts.
From a development standpoint, it would be so easy to just make the items balanced.
Yeah.
But they're
actually,
not.
no, it's actually not.
They're not.
Do you mean balance in terms of how they drop?
No.
Or
I think you mean
what's the best?
There's just way more instances for demon rubies to drop than angel sapphires. Angel sapphires are hard to get because only 3 enemies drop them, and they're not that great on the percentage charts. But for demon rubies, like 8 enemies drop them.
I'm gonna veto this conversation.
All right, fine. I just think that could have been really easily fixed by the developers, and they didn't. I wish that
this is the true problem with Valdis Story, that these
is the drop rate.
The drop rates of angel sapphires
versus demon rubies. Because
all right, so you want me to move to the next topic? Fine. Okay. Next topic, best topic, skill cancels.
Okay.
I love skill cancels in this game. I can't think of another game within this genre that's done something like it, though canceling occurs in other games in other genres. So in Valdis Story, there's a move, a mechanic called skill canceling. You get it very early. It's amazingly simple on paper, but adds wild amounts of depth to the gameplay. What you do is you press down on the control pad. That's it. And you perform a skill cancel. Now what it does is
Cancel skills.
it stops any animation that you're doing, putting you at frame advantage. It grants you invincibility, and it moves you to the ground. That's the three things. 3.5 things. You can also do a dash if you hold left or right, but mainly three things. It interrupts your abilities, and if you're in a damage string, it interrupts the damage string, puts you at frame advantage while being invincible, and it moves you to the ground if you're in the air.
It's worth mentioning that you like fighting games a lot.
You like fighting games more than I do.
I don't know what frame advantage is. That's not an invitation
okay.
for you to explain it.
Do you want me to explain? It'll be really quick.
Yeah.
Go, Gino.
Frame advantage. So every time you hit an enemy in a game, in like a fighting game or Valdis Story, they have a stagger animation.
Yep.
You know, they're staggered for X amount of time. When they are staggered, you can continue comboing them. What that canceling does is usually after you make contact with your opponent, there's a few frames where you're like putting your sword back or doing something that isn't damage, and you can't input more attacks. What frame advantage is once they are in a stunned state, they're taking damage and you can continue to combo them. If you're using cancels, you're getting rid of that time where you're like recoiling,
like sheathing
your weapon.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so that lets you keep the combo going by keeping them in a stun state without seeing your recovery frames.
Thank you, Gino.
That is a big thing in most fighting games, and Valdis Story uses it very well, I think.
Yes. So this one mechanic functions as a critical piece of all combat. It synergizes differently with certain characters. For example, the dash part of it synergizes very well with, I think, Reyna and Wyatt, because a lot of their potential abilities can involve like backstab damage. So if you can go behind the person and hit them from behind, you deal more damage. I think Vladen has some of that too in his like gunslinger mode or whatever. He's got like gun mode that he can go into.
Does he do gun kata?
No, this is not
The ultimate martial
Equilibrium.
arts.
We are not Christian Bale right now. But for Vladen and Gilda, they're more about keeping aerial combos going. So the fact that you can dash to the ground and then jump back up into the air while someone's still in a juggle in the air is huge for them. Especially somebody like Gilda, who actually becomes like a flying helicopter of death with like 4 jumps and a hover. You know, like she's air dominant. So skill canceling does amazing things for combat. It does cool things for mobility outside of combat. It acts as your dash. It acts as one of the things that opens doors. It acts as a way to buffer certain animations so that it makes things like speedrunning better. Speedrunners in any game would love to have skill cancel to work with, because it would just make so many other games that much better. Skill canceling basically enhances every character in a different way, and it's so simple on paper. I think it was just elegantly done.
Yeah, it adds a lot to the combat. It allows... So I can see where Vladen and Gilda would get some extra bonuses out of it, just because, at least with Wyatt and Reyna, getting people into the air is really not easy, and keeping them there is not easy, because you have to go up and get them. So once you knock them... That was the thing that I didn't learn about, is that you can do... There's a launcher. Like, if you hit...
Yeah, not every character has one.
And then jump, you'll knock your opponent into the air. It only works on, like, a few bosses. But most enemies, actually, you can't launch them. Or you'll kill them before you even bother to launch them. But for Reyna and Wyatt, I figured, because it's a very Devil May Cry sort of thing, where you're knocking someone up in the air, you're juggling them up there, and then you're going up after them.
It's very Devil May Cry here. Very Devil May Cry.
And so I tried to do that on some of the bosses, and with those 2 characters in particular, you can't really keep them up there, because once you jump up, you get like 2 or 3 attacks, and then you're on the ground again, and you can't just keep hitting them.
Gilda's the best at it. Wyatt's the next best when you get certain items on him. But you're right. it's a little bit underwhelming aerial combat for Wyatt and Reyna. It definitely comes out in um Vladen and Gilda. Gilda can stay in the air for like 12 seconds.
It's a lot of time.
Then she's got abilities that are like, hey, if you're in the air, you deal a damage multiplier. So it's freaking good.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed how they added a layer of depth and skill and twitchiness to the combat. And actually, one thing I wanted to talk about was in the boss fights, how style and speed and all those things come up. In every boss fight, you're getting constantly ranked on how well you're doing. So the game gives you some, like, basically energy tank equivalents. If you're familiar with Metroid, a item that when you take a certain amount of damage, you get healed back to a decent amount, and then you can keep battling. But in Valdis Story, you're getting ranked in every boss fight by how fast you're fighting, by how stylishly you're fighting, and by how many times you had to use those items. And so, depending on how you do in the boss fight, you get additional rewards or not. Like, if you get an S rank in a boss fight, you might get, like, +5 attack. If you get A rank, maybe you get +2 attack. If you get B, maybe you get +1. And if you get C or lower, you get nothing. You just get experience.
Or you get like a stat that's completely different.
Completely different or worse, or usually it's just lower amounts, or like HP, stats that are much more abundant. And so the game, by judging you and providing different stat bonuses depending on how well you do, it really rewards people who already know what they're doing and punishes people who don't. Like, if you can't get through the fight quickly, or you're dying and having to use those health potions multiple times, you straight up get worse. Your character is going to be worse than a person who knows what they're doing.
Okay, yes, worse than a person who knows what they're doing, but the person who knows what they're doing probably has different goals, right?
Yeah, but getting through the game,
you can get through the game like D-ranking all the bosses. You can get through the game getting bad
it's just harder.
Harder. I don't know if it's harder or if it's
you just straight up do less
easier
damage
for the better players.
It's straight up harder. Like, I just think that you're rewarding the player who is the least in need of rewards. And so I think that maybe if instead of rewarding S ranks with the biggest stat boost, maybe if it dropped an additional item, like a crafting item, like your problem with if you craft anything, you can't get the ultimate weapon, maybe you could have gotten an extra drop or something that would really appeal to the high-level player. You know, now you can upgrade these items that you wouldn't have been able to upgrade before. But by making the basic stuff like stats tied to how well you do, it makes it real. I mean, it's not that much harder, but you're punishing a player who doesn't need to be punished. And so it seems like that over the course of the game, the difference between S ranking, A ranking, B ranking, or C and D, or F in these bosses, you can get like 10 to 15 less attack. You can get like 20 or 30 less HP.
Well, you can get more skills or more stats, like to allocate. For example, the Yeti, like if you fight the Yeti and you get an A rank, you get +2 strength, which is fine. If you get S rank on the Yeti, you get another skill point to give out anywhere, which could be huge.
That's busted.
Yeah.
If you play the game and get like S rank everything, you're gonna end up with, I think you get 3 skill points from S ranking bosses, 3 whole skill points, and you normally only you normally get only 19 in the game. If you just don't do any of the bonus stuff, you get 19 in the game, and so if you get 3 more from S ranking boss fights, that's like a 15% increase of the amount of skills you get.
And that's the exact problem, is that those passives, those skill points are huge. Like, one of Wyatt's passives is like 15% damage increase. That is huge over some of these boss fights. And especially when you're higher level, you get access to even more powerful passive abilities.
Like your ultimate abilities.
Yeah.
On like the highest tier of your abilities. Yeah, if you could get 1 more of those versus 1 less of those, that could be huge.
It can be something like 20% extra damage flat rate, and that's huge. So why give that to the person who least needs it and deny it from the person who does need it more? And I think that it's just a matter of balancing, because the idea of having a a ranking system or a grading system isn't a bad one. It's just that you need to balance your rewards such that you are not unduly punishing the players who most need the help.
Right. Okay. So let me push back just a little bit more and say that the rewards you get are the same whether you're on normal mode or Godslayer mode. So the people that are playing this game on hard mode, veteran mode, Godslayer mode, if they don't get S rank, they replay that boss fight until they get S rank, because they need one more armor. They need one more stat point. They need 10 more armor ruin.
But
or
then
else they
balance those modes for those people. Don't cascade it down to the very normal mode with someone who's just picking up Wyatt for the first time. Do the extra little bit of work on the upper difficulties. I just think that the difference can be so significant, even though it's subtle. You don't notice that this is happening. But I definitely felt it when I was playing as Reyna, not speccing strength. The difference between 1 or 2 strength versus Wyatt, it was night and day. Like, battles took sometimes, like, I told you, it took
15,
me 30
20
minutes
seconds sometimes
to fight Magus.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that maybe if they balanced it so that the S ranks provided you something other than stats, and maybe they kept the stat stuff pretty
Fair
flat,
enough.
that would have been nice.
Fair enough. You're right that a new player is going to have a hard time if they're new to not only this game, but this genre, not knowing how to play fighting games like this. This isn't even a fighting game, but it's like
the combat is.
Yeah,
the combat's
it's like a
basically
Castlevania game, but with Marvel combat.
Yeah, and it assumes that you know what skill canceling is. It assumes you know that aerial combos are a thing. It assumes a lot of things of its player, and I feel like making them take those tests of boss fights, and the developers kind of using boss fights as a test to see how well you understand, when some players are going to come in having played Marvel vs. Capcom, and some players have never played a fighting game. Like, don't screw someone for not knowing.
Then again, I think some people that were in the community were asking for this. And
yeah, they were asking for it, but...
And in many ways, I think the developers responded very well to the community's wants. I mean, that's what you get when you have Kickstarter, right?
And
you respond to people's sort of requests. I think Pete wanted to talk about this a little bit too, so why don't you go ahead?
Yeah. My only question is, I think we could safely say, right, with these problems aside, that Valdis is sort of it's a success of Kickstarter, right? It's a good game, deserved funding, but these points, these problems we're raising point to whether or not we want Kickstarter to be, and I think eventually it will be, it's coming to it, sort of the dominant model of game funding, right? I feel like, yeah, Gino.
I think it's becoming a more dominant model of funding for smaller teams and mid-tier teams. AAA development, the highest expense of game development is in the millions and tens of millions of dollars, and there's no, even the most successful Kickstarters cap out at like 10. So I don't think you could fund a AAA game, like a real like Call of Duty or something that scale with Kickstarter. But something like Valdis Story, even though it doesn't have those intense 3D production values or, voice acting or some of the stuff that can really draw expenses, I think it's an excellent game. And so even though there isn't that flash and that sizzle, the actual part where you're playing the game is still very, very good.
Yeah. I think, though, what you're describing, I think, is what the landscape's going to become, right? I think you're seeing this already in movies to a certain extent, is you're going to have sort of the blockbusters, the franchises at one side, and the, Kickstarted funded indie games on the other, and you're going to crowd out such a large middle section. And that's not concerned about that. The success, the rise of Kickstarter will ultimately provide or cause the demise of a large swath.
I think that's already happened.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've noticed, but Midway, publisher that was very you might know Midway. What Midway games?
They did. Didn't they do like a flying? Yeah, they did NFL Blitz.
NFL Blitz. They did.
I do know
Stranglehold, the Chow Yun Fat, the successor to Hard Boiled. There was a video game successor to that. they don't exist anymore. THQ, the game, THQ doesn't exist any. Wait, does THQ still exist? I think they're gone too. Konami is getting out of video games. A lot of the mid-tier publishers just don't exist anymore.
You're right.
Or they're putting all of their money into one game or one or two games. And so
Midway did Galaga. Midway did Mortal Kombat games.
Yes, Mortal Kombat. Now it's owned by WB.
Yeah.
So a lot of these different toy headquarters, THQ's gone.
Midway did Rampage?
Yes.
Midway
was a very big arcade game developer. And once the bottom fell out of the mid section of
you're right.
of games, a lot of these publishers that were doing B tier work, just those games didn't sell enough, and now they're gone.
Now this is kind of maybe jumping out of our element a little bit here, but is that kind of happening in music too?
I think that at this point, like, no one gets paid in music.
True.
The distribution models are so skewed. I
think that right now it's like you're either going to be indie, like on SoundCloud or on like your YouTube channel or something, or you're going to have your social media be your music outlet, or you're going to be on a AAA label. And if you're in the middle, good luck.
Yeah, but
same thing goes for games.
Even if you're on the top, like music now, you have to be hustling. You have to be going to concerts. You have to be performing all the time. Whereas before, you would put an album out, and that would pay for your next album.
Yeah.
And you would go on tour if you wanted to. But now, you're going on tour because that's how you pay the bills. Because no one's paying for music.
But as Kickstarter becomes the dominant model, sort of...
It becomes a dominant model. I don't think it's the dominant model.
Yeah, I wouldn't say but it's definitely rising in its efficacy.
For lower scale stuff. Just because paying out of pocket, like a lot of developers who have the talent to make large projects, game development doesn't pay exceptionally well for the amount of skill that these people have.
True, there's an imbalance of skill to pay.
And so, I mean, if you're doing game development, you have to have the skills of a programmer, an artist, a producer, sometimes a voice actor. Like, you're sometimes pulling 4 or 5 jobs all at once. And those people who would leave large companies to form their own smaller companies sometimes do not have the security and the safety to put their own money up or get loans that would fund development for more than a year or two. And so Kickstarter, I think a lot of people are defecting. Like, there's Yooka-Laylee is a game that's going to be coming out in the next year or two.
It's like the Banjo-Kazooie child, like Prodigy.
It's Banjo-Kazooie,
not
but
Prodigy.
It's a
progeny.
It's a chameleon and a bat instead of a bird and a bear. And the developers are the people who develop Banjo-Kazooie. The music is by the guy who scored Banjo-Kazooie. Like, it's basically Banjo-Kazooie, except they couldn't afford the IP. You're seeing a lot of that kind of stuff. Like, speaking of Metroidvanias, Koji Igarashi, the developer of Castlevania, went to Kickstarter because he couldn't... Konami wouldn't fund more Castlevania games, and so he just left. He pieced and said, if you give me, some Kickstarter money, I can actually create the Castlevania game. Or he can't say Castlevania. It's called, like, Blood something. I can't remember what the name is, but I'll make the Castlevania game that you all wanted that people say we can't make anymore. But you prove them wrong.
And give me money to do it.
And, yes.
That's...
Also, Shenmue 3. The new Shenmue game.
People were talking about Axiom Verge like that. That was like the Metroid game people wanted. It was freaking good. Like, I mean, I didn't actually get my hands on Axiom Verge, but a good buddy of mine was playing it. Played it multiple times. I saw it. It was beautiful. Axiom Verge was good. Valdis Story is good. I am happy that this genre, this style, is not dead.
Yep.
My worry is, though, right, as Kickstarter... Let's say Kickstarter becomes more and more important to these small game developers, right? As there are more and more projects, it'll become more and more difficult to get funding, and you'll see the same sort of restrictions within the Kickstarter model that you saw, and maybe still see in sort of the classic funding model, right? You'll need to have certain buzzwords, certain ideas in order to attract significant numbers, and it'll become just as limiting.
Yeah, and I think that what we're seeing right now is that getting new ideas funded on Kickstarter is actually quite a bit more difficult than getting old ideas funded.
Absolutely.
A lot of the games that are getting funded on Kickstarter are being funded based on nostalgia or appeals based solely on what these developers have done in the past. And so I don't know if a new developer who has no track record could even get traction on Kickstarter, because you're getting choked out by so many people who are defecting from larger companies and saying, let me sell you your childhood again. But
I would
it
buy
can't be
my
named the
childhood
same
again
thing.
in a second. Kingdom Hearts.
We're not talking about Kingdom Hearts again. I refuse. Yeah, so I think that we're seeing, and another thing with Kickstarter is that it's kind of offloading a lot of the risk onto the consumer.
True.
And right now, Kickstarter, there's no obligation to actually finish what you started. You have to do.
Very true.
You have to try very hard to deliver on your promises. But if you fail, people are shit out of luck. And also, if you succeed, they have no ownership of the product that they help fund. They just get the product. It's like a pre-order.
Yeah.
So basically, you get all of your sales. You get a large portion of sales up front. People are locked in, even if the game comes out and is bad. And all of that is just for a few trinkets and some thank yous. I actually found Valdis Story's incorporation of Kickstarter stuff to be a bit jarring. As we mentioned before, there's Mr. Pancakes.
Sir Pancakes.
Sir Pancakes, the
You
floating
show some
corgi
damn
with the top hat.
respect.
The trickster god, Sir Pancakes. And
Trickster
this
God
game-
is right.
I mean, he's basically what's the character from the DC? I think
Loki?
it's DC universe.
No.
Oh, the
not
one
Marvel.
Superman used to fight.
Yeah, used to
Yeah.
fight Mr. Flubid.
Yeah, there's
or
like
whatever.
7 consonants and Z's and stuff in a row.
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's basically that guy. Sir Pancakes is basically a floating thing that screws with people.
Yeah, yeah.
But I found it a little jarring that this game, full of proper nouns and trying to be very self-serious about its story,
It was very simple.
also has Sir Pancakes and Lub Wub the Panda and Mr. McSteely and Shadowbox Sir XXX. A lot of the
Shaunathy.
characters.
These are
Shaunathy.
probably people's usernames and stuff.
Yeah, they're Kickstarter backers, and
Yeah.
in a game that is so self-serious about its story and its Gnobu monks and its Valdis and all that stuff, I thought it was weird to also see Sir Pancakes. Like, if you're going to be very serious, it seems like the Kickstarter incorporation actually wrecked some of the atmosphere for me. That, you know, we have this super serious story with these eyes and these gods that are at war, and then Sir Pancakes.
That's because they're like really 2 currencies online in Kickstarter, right? If you look at projects get funded and sort of how people attract users, whatever, there's sort of 2 ways it works, right? 1, it's a very good idea, it's awesome. Or 2, it's just the same sort of misplaced irony that the internet always traffics in, right? So I think
Yes.
that's the problem you're going to see with Kickstarter, right?
Like, if you donate this much, I'll name the character whatever you want.
Yeah.
And so we get YOLO Swag, Big Balls 9000 as an optional boss in the game.
And that's what happens when when irony becomes a currency, right? When nothing because nobody's going to win a Kickstarter contest and name them like something very like, oh, this fits for the story. It's a perfect, because who cares, right?
Well, some people did, but you're right. You're still hitting on a good
Yeah.
point. We wouldn't have a panda bear with a giant laser beam on its back if someone from Kickstarter didn't want that.
This is how
Yeah.
Detroit gets a RoboCop statue.
This is indeed, and I think that it raises the question about Kickstarter. Like, this is the game that people who funded the Kickstarter wanted, but does that make it the best game it could have been?
You're right. This
Exactly.
game, left to its own devices in its own developmental cocoon, might have not been
Come out
better
a
or
little
worse,
differently.
but it would have been different. It would have been more distilled and pure.
Yeah, I'm always, when I think of things like this, I always come back to Magic the Gathering. There's a set called Time Spiral. It's my favorite Magic set ever. The set's idea is it is a celebration of the history of Magic and all of its mechanics. So they brought back like 15 or 20 mechanics from throughout history. Every card has like 7 different references in it. It is a love letter to people who already loved the genre, who already loved the game and were super duper familiar with stuff. It also was one of the worst selling sets in recent Magic history. It drove new players completely out of the game for a while. It brought down sales. But when you read about what people want, what fans want, they ask for stuff like that. And so they are not necessarily considering all of the people who don't get all the references and who don't understand what's going on with the set. And so by servicing the hyperfan and by servicing the most entrenched of your set, you can sometimes cut the legs out of incoming players. And so I think that's one of the problems I had with Valdis Story early on, was a lot of things that were just you were expected to know and expected to come in knowing really hampered my appreciation for the game at first, because I didn't understand and I wasn't in the loop.
I experienced something that you experienced too, and this actually segues well into the next and sort of final topic that I wanted to bring to the table.
This is also my problem with Dark Souls.
Yeah. So, I'm gonna go a little bit away from not explaining the game mechanics so well, because we talked about that a little bit earlier. It turns out there was a game manual that didn't really get stapled onto the game the way it should have. That could have been worked around. But
if only there were physical copies.
Yeah, right. If I had a disc in a case and there was like a manual in the front cover, I would have read the entire manual before I even put the game in, to my,
I would have read it 6 times.
My console.
Playthrough.
Yeah.
So, what I'm trying to get at is the story of the game, which, now I'm not trying to say again, like, oh, you guys didn't play it 6 times, you don't get the real story. I'm not trying to say that. But I'm going to say that. So, when I first played through the game, you drop in from this, underwater city and who knows where. I have no idea what's going on. I'm just some kid with a sword named Wyatt. Okay, what's the story? If you just turn on the game before you even start your first playthrough, you just like watch the little opening credits, you do get a little bit, right? A little bit. But there's so much more, and so many pieces are just not filled in at all. Like, I know that there's like 2 gods warring, and it's because they tried to kill their mom god. They killed their mom god, who's also a god. But wait, she was like a human at once and who the fuck knows, honestly. This game is confusing if you don't play it enough or pay attention enough to get all the story details.
No, you see, the darkness is fighting the light. And there's this other third faction.
Shut up.
The Flood. It's called the Graveland.
Just shut your mouth. Shut your whore mouth when you're talking to me.
And he says, the darkness is not really the darkness.
So let me get to what I'm trying to do. Guys,
yeah, there's these heartless, and there are these things called nobodies.
Please.
And look.
Please.
Okay, I got it. Yep.
So, Valdis Story, there is a story here. It's a good story. I've gotten all of it, or almost all of it. And what I have experienced, I like.
You got to get that 7th playthrough.
There's layers.
So, there is layers, and I'm going to talk about them right now, because it's a cool mechanic, and I think it deserves a discussion point.
Yeah.
Yes, when you first play through this game, you don't know what's going on because you get bits and pieces. There is an item in the game called Book of the Old Gods. You get this item, you turn it in to one of your teammates, and he rewards you for turning it in by giving you a skill point or a stat point or something. It's one of the ways that you can develop your character and get story pieces.
So that's what you do with those things.
Yes, you give them to Vladen, and when you play as Wyatt, your first playthrough, you play as Wyatt. There's 5 for each character, so there's 20 altogether. Wyatt's are books 16 through 20. And Reyna's is like
seem like the right number.
Right. Reyna's is like 6 through 10. And Gilda's and Vladen's are the other 2
1 through
sets
5.
Yeah, respectively. They mix it up, so you get different parts of this, essentially like this history book that tells you what was going on before our merry band of protagonists entered into the scene. You get a little bit of information about who these people are, who are the Goibnu warriors, who are the different gods. There were more gods before them. They got dealt with. It ushered into new era of gods. There's a very long history book, and it's not that convoluted once you get all the pieces.
But wouldn't you say that if you're going to tell this story, well, first, one of the main ways that they deals with story outside of just some dialogue when you run into each of these towns is there's a gigantic list of all of the things you run into, and then there's a description of it at the very front of the game, or you can talk to Vladen and he'll tell you.
Yes, so that I like. That's cool. Right?
But it's basically the story is reading. It's reading text. It's not. You're not interacting with the story in a meaningful way.
You're not interacting. Like, you're not making any decisions. There's not any like plot points that change based on your actions. You're right.
I'm not saying even
like if you
plot
chopped
points that
out the
change.
whole thing, the game would be pretty much completely the same.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you don't like change the story. I'm saying that you don't get to see a lot of the major plot points. It's not like you're fighting all these different characters that you understand their history. You need to read this text document, and if you read this text document, you kind of get an understanding of what's going on. But you don't necessarily impact it doesn't usher you through the story.
You're not 100% right there, actually. So I'm going to throw this out there and say, like, I think when the developers were making this game, they probably made a conscious choice. Are we going to make a game that you play once, or a game that you have to replay multiple times? And they chose to make Valdis Story a game that you have to replay to get the full experience. And I'm okay with that. That's the kind of game that I like to play. Maybe some people don't like to play it. Maybe their Kickstarter people said that they wanted to have a game with high replay value. Fine. When you play Wyatt's story, and then you play Reyna's story, then you play Vladen's story, then you play Gilda's story, you play all their stories, different stuff happens. And this is the point that I wanted to make. When you play the different stories, you need to pay attention to what details are different. Because I think this is not as confirmed, this is more theory crafting on my part. I think if you isolate those details that are the same for 3 characters in one way, but for this one character's playthrough, it's actually kind of unique and different. That one character's unique playthrough is what actually happens if you look at the story from not just one perspective, but from the perspective of the group. I'll give an example. There are 4 main characters that drop into Scythiel, the city, and Reyna is one of the first 2 playable characters you have. There's a boss named Treyu, and if you fight Treyu as Wyatt, it's basically nothing. He's like, hey, I'm the electric, dungeon boss. I'm going to kill you. And Wyatt's like, sure, man, whatever. Let's fight.
I'm going to kill you.
I'm going to kill you first. But if you play as Reyna, you find out that Reyna was training as a monk with the angels. And she was a chosen one. She was going to have this special procedure or ceremony done to her to bestow upon her incredible power. She left her monastery, and this kid was the person that they chose instead of her because she left. Treyu was a young boy who had this procedure done to him to grant him immense angelic power. It was supposed to be Reyna, but she left, and Treyu got it instead. And so they have an extra dialogue piece where that's revealed. But you don't get that if you play it as Wyatt, Vladen, or Gilda.
Yeah.
Likewise, one of the first bosses, his name's like Azulor or something like that. I forget it, but it's like the very first demon boss you fight. That's Gilda's brother. They're family. So there's like relations between characters all over the place that you don't get unless you play the other characters' stories. Certain things happen differently. Here's another example. Gino, you played as Wyatt, right? Did you fight Gernot or Gernot, whatever?
Yeah, you have to.
Did one of your party members join you for the fight?
No, they can?
All right. If you play as anybody but Wyatt, Wyatt is there. That's where you find Wyatt, and you fight Gernot with Wyatt. It's like a tag team fight. That's how it should have happened, because if you don't play as Wyatt, Wyatt's just missing for the whole game, and you don't find him until you meet him in the ziggurat with him standing down against Gernot.
These are a lot of proper nouns.
Anyway.
There are so many.
Whatever. There's one of the bosses who's very influential to one of the characters. Wyatt's story.
Yeah, and almost every boss has some connection to one of the characters, which makes it kind of odd that they're in this underwater city that apparently no one knew existed, and yet everyone's arch nemesis found their way down there.
Well, it's because the main enemies are the angels and the demons, and there are certain critical characters, critical generals or captains of the angel army or demon army that when shit's going down, they're going
They
to
all
be
hang
there.
out at the end of different dungeons.
They're going to be there. Yeah. It's a video
Yeah.
game, man. Come on.
It is a video game. Totally is.
So I liked
That's
that
one thing we
aspect
all
of the
agree on.
story. It gave the player a reason to replay. Not just, hey, play it on New Game Plus, because you can replay this game if you want to. Sure, kind of. No, it said if you want to get more story, play the other characters. Oh, by the way, the other characters' playstyles are radically different. If you wanted to play a beat-down physical attack person, good, you played Wyatt. Do you want to play a spellcaster now, like a glass cannon spellcaster? Play Gilda. If you want to play a flashy, stylish gunman / summon minions around you, Vladen. If you want to play this sweet focus mode, use magic, but it's mostly buff magic, you're playing Reyna. So like all the characters play way differently. So there's tons of replay value here. Last point is this game, I think, was built and designed for speedrunning. And that's something that's incredibly important to the Metroid and Castlevania games, which are some of the most speedrun games ever. I think Super Metroid is the most speedrun game ever. Like, there's so many runs of Super Metroid. It's at every single, like, Games Done Quick and Con, and like everyone's gonna do a speedrun of Super Metroid.
Yeah, we actually saw a speedrun of Super Metroid, and people took questions about life and existence.
Yeah, it was like an AMA. Oh, by the way, we're playing Super Metroid in 45 minutes or whatever, how long it took. And literally ask us any question about life, and we will just answer it while playing Super Metroid. That was freaking cool, man.
That was cool. Yeah, so yeah, I guess on that, I will let you have the last word about Valdis Story.
Okay, if I get the last word, I'm going to say play it. All right? And I've never actually just said that so hard for a game, probably since Shadow of the Colossus Episode 1. But I picked up this game by accident. I'm so glad I did. It's the kind of game that I want all other games of this genre to at least look at and say, this was a really cool game. It took from its ancestors, Metroid, Castlevania, and did something kind of new. Primarily in this game, its combat system, which I really like. Combat system was so good. I want more games like this, and I want more respectful steps from their ancestors in this way. I want kind of like Axiom Verge did with its cool action system as well. So that is my final word. Valdis Story. I couldn't ask for a better gaming experience and be giving any developer a fair challenge.
Hi, Pete.
Yeah, Valdis Story's pretty good. But yeah, no, it's a good game. Billy might like it a little bit too much, but it is good. I want to finish with a prediction though. All right, Kickstarter based prediction. When people are listening to this podcast 20 years from now, and they will be, they'll look back on this moment. So I'm going to predict that Kickstarter, although it started as a dream of democratic funding, is going to end up increasingly insular and increasingly targeting a few specific types of game as the formula for getting funded becomes increasingly solidified.
I would say that that's already happened.
That's what makes it such a good prediction.
Shenmue 3 was funded. A lot of Kickstarter campaigns now are basically raw appeals to nostalgia. Hey, look at this game we made. Wouldn't it be great if we had the funding to make that game again? But different? Learning lessons?
No, but it's the same, but it's just, it's anew the same.
It's completely different.
It's differently the same. But a lot of the established developers who have gone to Kickstarter who have basically gone with that pitch. Double Fine with Double Fine Adventure. Hey, no one makes adventure games anymore. Let us make adventure games. And then they made an adventure game. It was a new adventure game, but it was a point-and-click game, which is a style of game that doesn't get made anymore. Shenmue 3. Shenmue 2 did not sell well enough to warrant a Shenmue 3. So Sony actually announced Shenmue 3 at their press conference this year's E3 and then said, hey, you should totally fund it. And then underneath the table, we're going to fund it if they don't have enough money. Like we said, Keiji Inafune and his, like, not Castlevania, but totally Castlevania. Like, his video is him sitting in a chair looking like Dracula. There's no Dracula in this game, for my knowledge. They see him, like, turning into a bat with his whip.
It's irony, man. Irony is the new sincerity.
Oh, no, it's Koji Igarashi. I misspoke. Keiji Inafune's. I believe he's the developer of Mighty Number 9, which is a Mega Man-like.
Ugh.
You're basically Mega Man, and there's basically roll. And it's yet another game where the pitch was...
Weren't Mega Man games cool? Let's make another one.
Yeah. I wish I had the ability to make more. Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of that happen already. And I'm happy that Valdis Story got funded because it is not one of those games. Even though it definitely comes from an established genre, it tries to improve upon it. I wish they made it so that you could move the map around and see the whole map all at once.
That's true.
That is a little thing.
We should have seen the whole
it's
map.
a little annoyance. But everything else, I think it was well put together. I wish that it was a little bit more accessible, but I think if you pick Wyatt and use skill strength, you're fine. Then it's fine.
And you learn how to play, so your next playthroughs, you understand what's going on. Wyatt is like the tutorial level. And I think...
I wish they just made him the only selectable character at first, and then unlocked all three.
I have to agree a little bit. I like that there's Reyna, too, but... Let me just say, if you had Vladen or Gilda as playable characters, like you would be even more lost. Like, you think Reyna is too big of a jump from Wyatt. Vladen and Gilda are different continents.
Yeah, so that seems like a minor thing. Like both Reyna and Wyatt both play pretty normally, all things considered. But if you are not used to the focus system or some of the other mechanics that are going on in this game, she can be quite a bit more difficult than Wyatt. And so I think this game was pretty cool. It was well put together. I do worry that when you have Kickstarter stuff and you're just like directly beholden to a very specific audience who gave you money, I feel like sometimes you end up alienating everyone else.
True.
I don't think Valdis Story fell all the way down that rabbit hole, but there were definitely certain things about this game that I was like, I don't think that if these developers had their own druthers, they would have done this.
Good use of druthers.
Thank you. And so, last thing, what we're going to play next week.
You got it, baby.
So I wanted to detox after playing this game.
What? Come on.
We have two options.
All right.
Thomas Was Alone.
Okay.
Or, what is the name of the game?
Are you sure we have two options?
Yes, we do have two options. We have Thomas Was Alone, and then...
While you're looking...
Life is Strange.
Life is Strange. Tell me a little bit about each. One sentence
Thomas
pitch.
Was Alone
Give me a sentence
is
about each.
Okay, Thomas Was Alone, it's a platformer where you control different blocks, like squares that jump around, but each of them have names and have different personalities.
Oh, I think I've heard you mention that game before.
And it is a game about these different blocks becoming friends.
Okay.
Or Life is Strange, it is a teen drama?
I've heard about it.
It is an adventure game where you play as a suburban
They release
teenage
chapters,
girl.
right?
Yeah,
It's
but
kind of like
I
a
think they're all
Telltale.
out except
It's kind of
for
like a Telltale
5.
game, but not really.
Yeah. Maybe we should wait until Life is Strange is all the way out then, because I think the last episode isn't out yet.
All right.
So we can save that for a future time. So I guess that solves the problem.
Yes,
I think
it is.
Thomas was alone.
Was alone.
Thomas Was Alone.
Yep.
Right.
Okay.
Oh God,
so-
what is this? Blocks of personalities.
Let's do it.
Yep. And narration. Yep. So Thomas Was Alone. That's gonna be our next game. If you want to get in contact with the podcast, go ahead and shoot an email to thatpinguino@gmail.com or @thatpinguino on Twitter. Thank you once again, Billy.
Thank you, everybody. I love Valdis Story. You guys should all play it. Had a great time again. Look forward to the next podcast.
Thank you, Pete.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in yet again. Make sure you come back again next week.
And from me, peace. Thank you. Bye-bye. Peace.